Okay, this is a short Livy translation about the Cult of Bacchus and the Senate's response to that. A little bit of background on the Cult of Bacchus. It's cults surrounded on the Roman god of wine and kind of revelry and parties. And uh, around Rome, when it started to spring up, there were a lot of rumors about kind of the deviant nature of its festivities. And so it became a huge problem, so much so that it was brought in front of the Senate and they decided to do something about it, and that's kind of what the translation is. Also, something that's going to be mentioned is a decree that the Senate makes, which is called the uh, Ultimate Decree of the Senate, which is pretty important, but I'm going to talk about that when it brings up. All right, we're gonna start with the first sentence here. We have qui or who, so which is going to be our subject is what's relating to that. So those people or those who we're going to go had only been initiated and outside of the sacred song or kind of sacred ritual. This is talking about people who had kind of been initiated in practice, or sorry, initiated in like kind of spirit, but maybe aren't full members of the cult. Uh, all right, here we have kind of go before or more relevant, kind of repeated after the the. So then this one's priest, so they repeated after the words of the priest. And we see these kind of two commas right here, and the ablative, meaning it's an ablative absolute. Okay, so they created, or sorry, they repeated after the priest. What did they repeat? Well, we go right here to the next kind of bit sectioned off by commas. They repeated the created prayer. All right, so we have kind of the created prayer, and now we need to find out. The next part is what the created prayer is. And so we have which, so the created prayer, which, so which pledged them to all or every form of nefanda is kind of unclean, and then that's going to be paired with libidinum, so unclean desire, and wickedness. Right, so remembering kind of the subject is still this who. We have but not, or kind of but neither. So but neither been active nor passive participants in the in anything which their oath bound them with obligati. And so what happens to these people who aren't active participants, or any participants really, but have been sworn in? Well, they were put in chains or put in prison. So this is the lesser punishment, and they'll still be put in prison. All right, now we go to the next bit. Starts with those who had dishonored themselves by murder and violence. Those who had by false testimony or forging seals, as well as forging wills or kind of papers, were afflicted or given capital punishment, so they were executed. For the next part, we have the number that were killed were many more than the number thrown in jail or put in chains. And then we go to the next sentence, a great or a great amount of both men and women were responsible or were the cause. So now to the next sentence, our new subject, the women who were known as guilty were, so then we skip to this part, were handed over or traded over to Manu, which usually means hand or kind of like band of soldiers, but in this case it's referring to kind of the power a man has over his wife or his household. And so they're handing them over to the pater familia, which is almost always going to be their husband, sometimes would be their father. And they're doing this in order for him to punish them in private. Now we have if no one is kind of suitable to punish them, then they would be executed in public. Now this word is a little bit weird, and it was a little bit hard for me to find because what it actually means is they would be kind of turned attention to in public, but it's almost like a saying for publicly executed. Next bit we have the next kind of item of business or the next thing brought before the council or kind of group of people was to destroy all of the bacchanali, or kind of like the altars to Bacchus, or the cult of Bacchus, first in Rome, next in all of Italy. Kind of outside of this, or kind of like escaping this, if they were ancient altars or sacred signs, or kind of like sacred places. Next part we have Senate in the nominative, so that's our subject. So the Senate kind of decreed or advised, but probably decreed in this context, that that from this point on, like henceforth, there should be no bacchanali, no like altars to Bacchus in Rome, and none in Italy either. So kind of in Rome nor Italy. And this is where the Senatus Consultum Ultimum comes in, with the kind of final decree of the Senate, giving emergency powers to a consul, and that consul could pretty much do whatever they want. They could sentence citizens to death without a trial. They could, use the forces of Rome, and it was given when that the Senate had a problem so bad that they needed that emergency power. It kind of replaced the dictatorship, which they would use before, and the dictatorship would be kind of used against outside powers, while the ultimate decree of the Senate would be used against like inside or civil powers, like in this instance. We have, if anyone had this kind of holy custom necessary to leading their life, and they could not omit it without committing without being able to commit kind of a sin against their religion, or commit the sin of kind of like irreligion, then they should declare themselves in the presence of the urban praetor, or the kind of city prefect. If the Senate gave permission with no less than 100 present, so with a full Senate House, he may do his sacred rites, but with no more than 5 people taking part in the ceremony, and with no common money. So this isn't a church that takes collections and has kind of like its own money to spend and do on things, and with no magister sacrum, or kind of leader of ceremonies, and no priest.